What miniature can I make that's going to scare the pants off of my friends in our next game session? The Gelatinous Cube. That's this week on Tabletop Witchcraft. Hey there and welcome back to Tabletop Witchcraft. This week we're going to make this awesome looking gelatinous cube. It's my take on the classic D&D enemy. Now I made one of these a few weeks back when I was working on my ocean tiles because I had a little bit of resin left over. I didn't want to waste it, so I quickly made a cube out of some plastic I had laying around and poured one of these, and I thought it would be an awesome introductory resin craft for all you crafters out there. Now obviously I had to go and spice it up a little with an LED in it and a lot of other cool little features. But if you don't want to add the LED, you can leave it out and you're still going to end up with a really cool looking gelatinous cube. Alright, if you're ready, let's go grab some supplies and let's get crafting. Alright, so I was really happy with the way my experimental gelatinous cube turned out right there. And you know, it was such a fun, quick, and easy thing to make. I figured I'd have to show everybody how to make it here on the channel. So when I was working on my ocean tiles, I had some leftover resin and I quickly had to come up with something for a frame for this gelatinous cube. And what did I have laying around? A bunch of these little dividers that you get when you get a Plano case like this one you see here in the background. So all I'm going to do is grab a bunch of these extra pieces because you always seem to have extra dividers when you buy these cases, and I just so happen to save them all. So pick up one of these cases, I'm sure you'll find a use for it, or any other type of rigid plastic like this, and you're going to basically just make a little cube out of it like you would find in an ice cube tray. Now something that's really important when you're doing this, you want to make sure that your hot glue is completely sealing the frame, otherwise you're going to have an absolute nightmare after you've poured the resin. Now I'm using some super clear epoxy. It's a two-part epoxy, an A and a B, and you want to make sure that when you mix these, you mix them in even parts. One of these is a little bit more viscous than the other, but you know, again, just mix these so that you have an equal amount of A and B, and then it's really not that much resin, so taking the bubbles out of it really isn't an issue, and some bubbles actually look pretty good in it once you're done. Now you can find a link down below to all of the items you see in this video, including this dye for the resin. Now I ended up using quite a bit of this. Typically when you put an ink into resin, you know, you really don't need much because a little bit goes a long way. I ended up adding about 15 drops of this stuff into this mixed resin before I found a color that I really liked. Once you have it all mixed up, just pour it into that cube right there and you should be all set. Now I did screw up, and there's a component in this video that I did not use that I used in my ocean tiles. We'll get to that in just a minute. Now I grabbed a couple skeletal pieces. This skeleton, I have a jawbone right here, and a couple other things that I got from Barthel's Marvels over on Etsy. You can head over there if you want to pick up these exact items. And I just painted these up, and I'm going to stick them right into that curing resin you see there in the background. And you can get really creative with whatever you want to stick into that resin, you know, to make it look like it's really devouring all kinds of cool minis. Now you want to keep an eye on the resin, and once it starts to really set up to where you're like, oh man, this is too thick and I just ruined all my work, that's pretty much when you want to add this stuff. Right about here where the resin will slowly close back over the miniature. I found this to be about maybe 20 minutes or so after I had poured the resin. Now if you do get a few bubbles, I personally think it looks good. Now you can see I can work with this here and I don't have to worry about the miniatures moving around on me. If you find that the resin isn't really flowing back the way you want it, a little bit of heat will help move it. Now this is where I messed up, and I was so happy that I was on Discord chatting with my patrons when I was actually pulling this apart, and one of my patrons suggested something here which will actually come here and save me in just a minute. What I should have done was put a little bit of mold release on this, and I didn't do that. So to save me, it was suggested that I put the mold into some hot water, and I could have also put, I guess, some soap on top of this to help release it from the edges. I tried it with just the hot water first, and it seemed to work pretty well. It did make it a little bit gummy, but it wasn't really an issue because we're going to coat this in something else once we're done anyway, so that wasn't a problem. Alright, now that we got our gelatinous cube, we're all set. We can put that aside just for a minute. Now let's work on the base. I'm using a couple 2-inch Reaper bases that we're going to place this miniature on. Now, if you don't want to do the LED portion of this video, you can kind of leave this part out. We are going to work with a little bit of green stuff in a minute to make a really neat base. But here, we're going to cut the entire bottom out because we want to have a really cool string LED light glowing from the bottom to make this gelatinous cube glow. Now to do that, we need to make a special miniature base and compartment that's going to hold the battery and the light. So to do that, we're going to place some magnets in the bottom, like you see right here. And we're going to take this single CR2032 battery pack, and it's going to be mounted to the inside of this miniature base. What I'm doing here is marking out the perimeter of that. That way I can place hot glue, as you see right there, around the edge so that it doesn't slide. So when I put this together, I can access the on-off switch from the bottom, and it's not going to move that case around on me. Now, one of the things that we want to do is make it so that this case will come apart, and you can see there's a little bit of a gap where the CR2032 case is a little too big for these two once they come together. So to take care of that, we're going to place a piece of paper towel around just the bottom miniature base. So once we mix up a little bit of green stuff right here, and we wrap it around both of the 2-inch miniature bases, it's going to harden, and we're going to be able to pull it apart, and it's not going to stick to the bottom one. So it's essentially going to make a case that we can pull apart and access the battery pack in the future. Now you can see I'm working on a little bit of parchment paper that allows me to work with the green stuff and not have it stick once I'm done. And I started adding some stonework, as you can see right there on the bottom, and I realized I should actually texture this before I do the stonework, so that's what I'm doing here with my favorite little texturing tool. Alright, now that we have that, then we can go back with a clay sculpting tool to add some really large stones. I want this to look like a dungeon tile once I'm done. And the key to working with green stuff is keeping the tool wet while you're working with it. 24 hours later, once it hardens, you can see how we can now pop that section apart, and we can access the inside of the miniature base. Alright, now I'm not going to get all in depth as to how I paint this up, but like I said earlier, I want it to look like a dungeon tile, so I'll put a link up above to my HD dungeon tile video, and there you can follow the paint scheme to how I painted this up. Now we're going to take a clear piece of packaging from a toy, and we're going to take a little bit of high grit sandpaper and scuff it up. Then we can add a little bit of super glue around the perimeter of that and place it right on top of that opening that we put in the miniature base. This is going to allow light to disperse evenly through the bottom of the gelatinous cube once we get the light in here. And I love this stuff. In order to just keep working quickly and effectively, we're going to use a little bit of accelerant on that super glue, and we can keep going. Alright, and then finally, we'll take a little bit of super glue and place that right around the perimeter of the gelatinous cube and right onto that miniature base. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to add something to the outside of this gelatinous cube, so I wasn't worried about it being a little tacky, and it's going to be a little bit of this Vallejo water texture mixed with the same dye color that we made for the gelatinous cube. So you might think, well, the gelatinous cube has a really sharp or rough angles to all the sides. This is where we take care of that problem. We're going to mix this dye in with the water texture, and we're going to add this to the entire gelatinous cube, especially on all of the corners. It's going to add that wavy, bubbly look to the gelatinous cube, and it won't look so square. And I like to add a little bit in one direction just to show that the gelatinous cube is like, moving through a hallway or across the floor. And I always like to take a step back when I'm working on something and really look at it from a distance. It helps you pick out areas that need to have a little bit more attention or detail. And that's sort of what I'm doing here. Alright, now on to a little bit of electrical. As I mentioned before, you can pick up most of the items that you see in this video to my Amazon links down below. Some of these items though you can get over at Terraintronics. I'll also have a link to his site in the description. Now what we want to do is take this little light here and coil it up into a circle. This is just a little jig that David over at Terraintronics made for me. You don't need that, but what you want to do is have a nice tight coil of that light. We're going to strip both leads to the CR2032 battery pack, and then we're just going to twist those together on each end of the LED light that we put together. And very simple, we now have light for the bottom of the gelatinous cube. And just to make sure that we don't cross anything here, I'm going to put some of this heat shrink tubing over that, and we're all set and ready to throw this right into the miniature base. And the neat thing about this is you can see once this is put together, you can now leave it as is, and in the future if you ever have to change the light or the battery, you can very easily access it and change it down the road. And just like that, you got yourself a really awesome custom gelatinous cube. Alright, so there it is, the gelatinous cube. There's so many cool things you could add to this resin to really spice up the cube as well. You could add weapons and maybe somebody sticking out of the cube a little bit. You could vary the color up a little, and they really don't take long, so you could have a whole army of gelatinous cubes for your next game session. Alright, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Hit that bell notification so you don't miss further videos here on Tabletop Witchcraft. And consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. It's support over there that really helps fund this channel and helps me keep producing these videos and sending them your way. Alright, until next time, I'll see you around.